Africa should not be ignored. Africa is not just to be seen as a place of problems, because as we have seen even in the recent times, everybody has problems.
Yeah.
There's not a single country that doesn't have problems. Not a single one. So some problems bigger than others, but everybody has problems.
President Kagame for joining us here. I just want to tell a little vignette. I think it was about 15 years ago. I'm sort of time challenged, so nobody fact-checked me on this. I was invited to a small little kind of global infrastructure meeting that former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright was involved in, and you basically did whatever Madeleine Albright asked you to do. If she called you, I would say yes, and all of a sudden, with jet lag, ended up in a small room, interesting people, didn't know them, in Istanbul. And so I'm sitting there with this guy, no formality, no suit, not a jacket, not a tie. And I said, "Hey, what do you do?" And he says, "I'm Paul Kagame. I'm president of Rwanda." And and then we met at Clinton Global. We met. So this was, quite a long time ago, and we've had conversations. But what was really struck me at that moment, so many years ago when we first talked, was your vision for taking Rwanda out of the nightmares and horrific experience it had, and to writing a different story for Rwanda. So, Mr. President, let me just say, right now you're here for many heads of state of more than 40 different countries in the African continent with the President of the United States. Is this summit going to matter for Rwanda in any specific, tangible way?
Well, yes, we are here. We are having a summit, U.S. Africa, getting together. We are here 2014.
Did anything come out of that?
Well, we had a good meeting. At least we had a good meeting. Even now, I think we're going to have a good meeting. The rest, I think.
And you were there then. You're one of the few that were at both.
I was there. I was there 2014. Now, this time around, I'm here. We come and participate. We give our views about many things to do with Africa or to do with the relationship with the U.S. And we keep going.
Well, I interviewed a woman yesterday. Her name is Arikana Chihombori Kwao. If any of you know, she's the former African Union ambassador to the United States. She's right now in Zimbabwe, and I interviewed her yesterday. And she said that the United States shows incredible disrespect towards Africa, that it did not share an agenda with the African leaders that it had asked for, and that this is more about China than it is about Africa. And I'd just be interested, it's an interesting frame that I think was candid and was a critique of the approach that American policymakers. So what's the tough love that American policymakers and President Biden need to hear about how they deal with African leaders?
To begin with, the problem of relationship with China or with the United States is systemic. If you go many years back, when the international institutions were being formed, Africa was not anywhere at the table where many issues were discussed. And from that time, what has always been visible is the assumption that these big countries have to decide everything for themselves and for others, even others without participating or having a say at all. Some people call it, of course, double standards, which I may understand, because there is a lot of saying, do as I say, not as I do. A lot of it goes on, and that's what describes the double standards. So, but with the relationship between Rwanda or Africa and China, or Rwanda and Africa and the US, I think the most important thing is, I speak for myself, I speak for Rwanda. I'm sure many Africans would have a lot to say. I don't think we need to be bullied into taking or making choices, choosing between US or China. It's really none of our business. I think we need to have both and others as partners, in as far as they also respect us and understand that we have something to contribute. There is a lot at stake for us. So we can have something to say. We need to have something to say. So whatever is going on between China and the US, and then that being brought to Africa, is something we need to treat carefully ourselves. Minding our business, we have countries to run, we have a continent that should be in this conversation the way it should be. So there is therefore, on our part, at least as far as Rwanda is concerned, to resist being drawn into these big power plays and just associate with who gives benefit to the country or who listens to you and respects you. And I think that's the way I would prefer we go about the business.
When you and I chatted last year, I raised the U.S.-China issue. You said, Steve, U.S.-China are important, et cetera, we can deal with them, but, Rwanda has its own story. If you go to an American in Oklahoma, Alabama, anywhere who may not be tuning in right now and said, what do you think about Rwanda? For them, the frame is probably about the genocide. That's what they last know and remember. Others, we see a lot of coverage of you. See, the Paul Kagame story is one where some people look at you as a liberator, a savior. Other people look at you as a strong man, who wants to keep his job a long time. What is the Rwanda story that you want Americans to know, others from the continent to know? What is the proactive Paul Kagame agenda that you put on the table?
Rwanda is not just a statistic. We are there, we exist. And we have to make sure Rwandans live their lives the way they have chosen to, not being dictated to by anyone. Whatever problems Rwanda has, so do these other countries, big or small, have their own problems. I can't be dealing with my problems and allow you to bring on top of that your own problems. So I have to deal with my problems the way the people of the country have chosen. And of course, mindful of the fact that there is no country that lives on its own or stands alone. It's not an island. We relate with others. We have to relate with others. There's no question about it. We have to listen to other people, what they say about us. And we must tell other people what we think about ourselves and what we want to do for ourselves. So in that interaction, that's where we all benefit. I can't be there. In fact, if you look at even our own history, the many problems the country had, many would attribute that history to external factors. They talk about colonial times and what happened and so on and so forth. For us today, we are not there. We've left that behind us. Mm-hmm. What happened in the past happened. We learned lessons, but we have to look more to the future than to be caught up in the blame game of who did what to us in the past. Now we are there. What are you going to do for yourselves is the question. So that's what we concentrate on. We concentrate on saying, whatever happened in the past happened. Have we learned lessons? What do we do for ourselves? So the people you would ask about Rwanda and tell you all kinds of stories. There are different categories of people. There are those who know absolutely nothing about Rwanda, and yet they want to tell you the stories about Rwanda. There are others who know the stories, but they have their own views of how Rwanda should be and so on and so forth. They have their own right to do that. There's another category of those who know. In fact, it is their story. Mm-hmm. They want to tell it as it is, or they want to do whatever is possible for them to contribute to the well-being of Rwanda, and that's the other category. So we have to steer through all these different categories and views, but the country has to have a direction, and that is the responsibility of the leaders of the country.
You know, if I were to, put on the table that there are sort of three angles of a story, right, on Rwanda that I think that would be out there. You might not agree with them, but, one would be a friend of mine that many of us know, Mark Dybel, is in Kigali today for the second big African Summit on Public Health in Kigali. They're launched, you're opening a new biopharmaceutical industrial park and doing a very positive, sort of modern, interesting story. COVID vaccines now being tried in your public health. That's one story. Another story that many Americans know is Paul, we've talked about it before, Paul Rusesabagina, who's very popular in the United States, in prison now in Rwanda, and I think you've been in, potential discussions about him with others like Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, and we classify Paul as a wrongly detained person. There are concerns here. And then there's the third with the conversation with Secretary Blinken that you had last week about the DRC and about Rwanda's activities and concerns that you might be destabilizing the DRC. So those three stories, if you were to do it, my question to you is, why not solve the DRC and the Paul story and have more of the modernization, tech, we're growing our economy? You get defined in different ways in the international community. Why not solve the two and elevate the third?
Well, to begin with, there is no guarantee that even if you did what they want you to do, you would actually get those promises you're talking about. We've been there for, now the country has been moving on for 28 years. How about what happened before actually those stories came up? There wasn't much flowing in that sense that later on was stopped by those stories. So, but that's a different thing. Let me quickly speak to the two problems. The story of Rusesabagina, and in fact it explains now at the beginning what happens with the countries and the relationships and so on. A big country like the United States dealing with Rwanda, a small country somewhere in the middle of Africa. What I was saying, when people just tell you what to do or want to tell you what to do for yourself, comes in this sense. That story of Paul Rusesabagina, the case is very clear. It has gone through the courts of law with the due process. The evidence, the facts about the case were presented in the open. The history of that is also clear. It has been told. Now, there's something wrong here that...
And it involved the European courts. Did it involve the European courts?
What?
With Paul, did it involve the European courts as well?
Okay. That would be another big problem if it involved the other courts outside of Rwanda. I'm talking about Rwanda in our legitimate right to do what we have to do for ourselves. But he's charged with other 20 people. In other words, there are 21. In fact, all of them found guilty on the basis of that evidence and facts presented before the court. The other 20 are not complaining because some of them admitted what they were involved in, and with Rusesabagina as even at one time their leader. Now, with this situation, somebody comes and says, no, this person is famous, he's a celebrity, you have to, and he's a resident of the United States, so by that, you've got to release this person. And some of us have raised this question and say, okay, we let this one go free. How about the other 20 who have been in the same crime with him and have actually pointed to him as even having been their leader? That's one. So the second aspect to that is, what are we going to have to deal with here? There's a serious case here, but it will be nullified because somebody in the United States is saying so. Well, some people may find that normal. I don't. Rwandans don't. So we might find...
So is Blinken's advocacy and determination of him being wrongly detained helping his case or hurting his case?
I think from what I have said, you can conclude. Yes.
Oh.
Because we've made it clear there isn't anybody going to come from anywhere to bully us into something to do with our lives. And we accept it.
Just finally, is there
And maybe make an invasion and overrun the country, you can do that, but...
Is there